Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. I'm here on another Goon Profile. Today I am with Mel, aka Meth. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. As always, to start off, when did you discover Gorgeous George, and what made you move from a lurker to a goon?
I discovered George at the beginning of COVID when I was working from home full time, and I needed something to listen to while I was working. I was searching prank calls, and I came across Prank Access, and that's where I first discovered George. And I was like, this guy cannot be for real. And then I found, researching him more, I found Sean's videos and I just thought what he did was hysterical. And yeah, ever since then, I've just been fascinated with George. Not in a
Yeah,
good way.
right.
Don't get excited, George. It's not in a good way.
Yeah, it's a common theme that when people first discover George, they don't believe he's real. Do you remember a moment where you thought, "Holy shit, this is real"?
Just the more I watched him, the more I realized it wasn't an act, it was his personality. Just the more I watched him, like it was, the same sort of fake macho disgusting act, and I was like, yeah, this isn't an act, this is really him. And at one point I think he even says something to the effect of, this isn't a character, this is me.
Yeah, right. He's weirdly bounces back and forward on
He
that
does.
character thing, but I don't think anyone would dispute, the awful persona that he puts out into the world is really him.
Right.
So I promise not to abuse the as a woman theme, but you are the first female goon guest. So as a woman, do you believe your viewpoint of or experience with George is different from, say, the male goons?
I do, and that's why me and Tony, when we got together, um I said to him, would you be interested in having a female point of view? And he was all for it. He thought it would add something different just because so many of the goons are male.
Hmm.
um yeah, I seeing things from a female perspective, I see George as a total creep. um and it's really the sexual stuff that just kind of makes me want to barf. And that's what I like. The guys focus on, like the gay stuff or whatever, but
Uh,
yeah, it's different from a female perspective. I could just imagine being like running into George in a bar or something. So yeah, I think it's a
yeah.
bit different.
Do you think? I mean, so we know George has vile thoughts about women and a history of abuse to match, but we've also recently learned about his low testosterone, and we see pictures of him, and he's, I'm not trying to be snarky, but he's getting more and more morbidly obese. Do
Right.
you, at this point, consider him still a danger to women?
Yes.
How come?
He's, I think as long as he's mobile in some way, he would be a danger. Like that Christmas video they posted from the pizza place, I could easily see him hitting on, a waitress or something. Um, yeah, I still see him as a threat for sure.
Yeah. Do you believe I mean, he seems to, in general, his past relationships, it always seems like he has to be given, he has to have leverage over the person to
Right.
be able to engage in a relationship. Do you think he has anything left to give as leverage?
I don't know if he ever did, and that's why he goes after women who are, um, we'll say, vulnerable, whether
Hmm.
it be physically, mentally. There seems to be a pattern starting with Sue, um, going down the line to Jamie. So I
Yeah,
think he definitely looks for women who are vulnerable in some way.
yeah, the pattern definitely shows. In your opinion, what then has been George's biggest failure?
Where do I start? George's entire life has been a failure. I, I guess the biggest failure was, how he ended up homeless. Um, spending all his money on hookers and engagement rings and trips to Vegas. Having a house that he supposedly loved, um, and it's gone just because he was so financially irresponsible. And yeah, now he lives in his van.
Yeah,
So I that's got to be somewhere at the top of the list. But his entire life has just been a failure. At least since he's been, since we people have gone after him.
hmm
There's the Lowell suits with Will and Sean. Like the list is never ending.
right. Yeah, and when it comes to George's failures, how much would you accredit to Goons kind of kickstarting that, or I mean, would you credit Goons for any of George's failures, or is this all on George? Do you think these same blunders would have happened if Goons had never existed?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, obviously the Lowell suits, that was goon related. But George brought that on himself.
Hmm.
Um, I don't blame the goons for anything that's happened. George did that all to himself.
Yeah.
Losing his house wasn't the goons' fault. Like none of that was our fault. Um, I think the only thing the goons, when he first started getting trolled, was make him paranoid. That's it. And everything else has been self-inflicted.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd love to get your thoughts uh, on George's relationship with his father's house. It's something I certainly haven't. I don't have any, definitive opinion on this yet, but he loved that house. It was really important to him. Yet he
Supposedly.
trashed. Yeah, he trashed it and. Um, never made any serious effort to maintain it or pay for it.
Right.
What? Yeah. Do you have any theories about why his thoughts and actions are kind of contrary to each other as far as his house, the
It,
former bank's house?
the bank's house, yeah. That's one thing I've never been able to figure out about George is the house. He would go on and on about how much he loved it. He grew up there. He had so many good memories there. Apparently his father built it, or his grandfather, something like that. But yet he let it go for such a stupid reason.
Hmm.
Um, I don't get it. For someone who claimed to have loved the house and had been connected to it as much as he says he was, for him to just kind of, you know, let it go. I don't understand it. I really don't.
Yeah, me neither. I don't know if we ever will. Uh, this is kind of along the same lines, and it's a big question, so no stress. Just curious what your initial thought is. But what do you believe has been George's worst argument over the years?
Um, that's a long list too. I think just him trying to defend his actions, regarding losing the house, um, his relationship with Sue, his relationship with Jamie is probably, I would say, the worst. Um, just trying to defend the accusations that are out there against him.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, he doesn't have a good explanation for anything. you know.
It really doesn't.
He really doesn't. And that's why he continues to get trolled, and that's what George doesn't understand, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, Jamie for sure I think is the worst.
Yeah, for me, it's the "she shared my bed" is
Oh god,
always when he
yeah.
says that. That's kind of gets the biggest eye roll from me.
Yeah. It's just because what he says is so uh contradictory to what we've heard, you know, like Angela's voicemails, you know, in Jamie's own voice, and it's
Hmm.
the opposite of what kind of relationship George claims they had. So, yeah, that's the big thing for me.
Yeah. So everybody, most people know you best as one of the host of Field Ins. What was your inspiration for using a podcast as the medium to express yourself?
When me and Tony got together, it was initially his idea to do like the podcast format.
Hmm.
And I thought it was a great idea. We wanted to do something that was, you know, not so sporadic. We wanted to do something scheduled once a week where we could talk about George and go over his content, and just so people would have something scheduled like, oh, it's Friday night, Field Ins is on. So, and there's so much George content to cover that we thought even once a week we could keep going, and we have. It's been next week it'll be a year for us.
Right. Yeah, that's really amazing. Did you see it going that far when you first started?
I wasn't sure, to be honest, when we first started. I wasn't sure what kind of response we were going to get from people, if people were going to like us, if they would get bored um, with us going over George every week. But I think people seem to enjoy it, and they seem to like, you know, our regular scheduled program, which is Friday night.
Hmm.
Um, so the more we went along, the more confident I became that, you know, we would keep going.
Yeah, I mean, Fieldins really has been so great. Not only does it serve a lot of really useful functions for this community and, sharing news and being able to talk in real time with everybody and discuss everything that's going on, but you guys, the three of you are just such a great team that it's a lot of fun listening to you really talk about anything. In my profile with Tony, he talked a little bit about kind of your different responsibilities, but I'd love to get your viewpoint of how you three kind of divvy up how you present Fieldins.
I this is Tony does a lot of like the technical work,
Hmm.
like setting up the stream, getting that all sorted out. Um, Lewis is pure comedy. Lewis is the comedic factor, I think, out of the three of us.
Hmm.
Um, and for me, it's sort of researching the George episodes, going through, because he has multiple channels, and some things are listed on some channels but not on others. So I have to kind of sift through the content, make sure it's in chronological order, which is what we've been trying to do. Listen to it. If it's boring, you know, I scratch it off the list. I don't like putting people through that, you know, the boring political, you know, Bill Clinton crap that, you know, George is always droning on about.
Uh-huh.
That's not entertaining. And we've talked about, you know, well, technically it is George content and we should be covering it, but at the same time, we don't want to bore people to death.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of my responsibility.
it seems like a really hard job. I can
It can
imagine
be
though.
painful.
Yeah, I
I'm
can
not gonna
imagine.
lie. It can be painful.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. And it's so believable that there are Gorgeous George show episodes out there that are so boring that even the Fieldins crew can't make them entertaining. I'm sure you
Yeah.
watch some and think like, all right, there's just nothing anyone's gonna do with that.
and some, and I'll watch them just in case there's a gem hidden in there somewhere. And that actually happened not too long ago. There was an episode, I can't remember exactly which one it was. um, Tony was adamant, no, it's going to bore people to death. And I'm like, but there's gems. Once in a while, we'll find a gem, and we did. And Tony loved it. He said, you were right. To show it.
Huh?
So yeah, every once in a while, we'll get a hidden gem. One of my favorites is when he had um, it was a group of people, and it was Sarah, the quote unquote psychic, and
Uh-huh.
when she said the word rapist, George made duck face. And
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, that was one of my favorite hidden gems. So it's stuff like that we watch for.
Okay. Yeah, I will definitely. I'm gonna go back and rewatch that. Yeah, I think you guys like paused and talked
Oh
about it
yeah,
for a
Tony
while.
went over it like 5 times, slowed it down. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Well, I'm glad your hard work is paying off because that is definitely a worthwhile moment to look at. So, for people who haven't experienced it before, and again, I promise this will be the final time I say as a woman, but
I
you
I
know,
don't mind, honestly. I don't mind.
okay, okay. I appreciate you letting me know. I don't want to like lean on that, but hearing yourself called out in a George Rager, what is your general reaction to that?
Oh my god, it's hysterical. And I knew, honestly, when we first started, about 3 weeks in, we got a rager from George, and he went
Mhm.
after both of us. And that was like, yeah, we're on the right track. Like, we were shocked how quickly we got to him. And clearly we've continued to get to him. But that was so gratifying to get a rager from him like 3 weeks in after we started. It it really is laughable. Um, up until recently, George had no idea what I looked like, or what my name was. So, the combat boots, puberty boy. I,
Yeah.
I mean, he just pulls stuff out of thin air, and it's all you can do is laugh because it's okay if you say so. I wear combat boots. Like, what a random thing to say,
Mm-mm.
you know? So, yeah, George, believe it or not, is actually funny in those moments, but other than that, he's not.
Yeah, and I'm curious too then, because you bring up an interesting point, just how differently people can take, being made fun of online, George who rages, and then, someone like you who seems to really embrace the ridiculous thing that George says. Do you have any advice? And again, as a content creator, I think this is
Mhm.
relevant to you for, taking being trolled or taking any type of criticism and not blowing up like George does and becoming a lol cow.
My theory is like kind of the thing I kind of go by is if I make fun of people, they should be able to make fun of me. Like it's only fair.
Hmm.
Um, if I can dish it out, I should be able to take it. And I know George has said that many times, but he is not able to take it. That's the difference between, the goons and him. We can both dish it out. We can take it, and he can't. So I just think it's fair. Um, but I really don't take it seriously. It's George grasping at straws. A lot of time people will say things without knowing anything about you. It's just, you know, like I said, with George, it's completely random. So it's hard to take him seriously or get offended by something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Do you consider yourself a troll?
I do.
Cool.
I guess I have to because technically I troll George every Friday night. I think that would be considered trolling. I'm not sure if Tony and Lewis feel the same way, but um, I think back to I've listened to um, the show you did with Roger and Ron, you and Tony, and you were
Hmm.
attempting to talk about trolling, even though Ron wouldn't let you.
Yeah, Ron was uninterested.
Yeah, that was a complete disaster, but it wasn't because of you or Tony. Um, and Tony and like both of you were saying, trolling has become, people like journalists or private investigators, people like that are now considered trolls because a lot of what they do is on the internet. And I don't know. I think it's just easier. Yeah, sure, I'm a troll. Who cares? I don't take
Right.
the title very seriously. If you want to call me a troll, go ahead. I'm not offended by it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
first and
Yeah.
foremost, I consider myself a goon. So
I
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
yeah.
S- George asserts that the goons are obsessed. Do you agree or disagree?
I wouldn't use the word obsessed. Maybe fascinated.
Hmm.
Um, like captivated. Would be a good word. And again, not in a good way, George. Don't be stroking your 2-inch dong. Yeah, like for me, I'm fascinated by George. The simple fact that he does not understand why people go after him to this day. And I don't know if he ever will. And I'm absolutely fascinated by that. And he's been told, George, stop responding, stop giving them what they want, and they'll go away. And he just cannot do it.
Why do you think that is?
I think it has to do with his narcissism. Like any attention is good and good attention, even if
Hmm.
it's negative. I think George just likes being the center of attention. He likes that people are talking about him.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's where that is rooted.
Do you have any advice for new people coming into the community to learn more about George, or if they come across one video and say, "Oh no, that's not real," like where should they go to get the real George?
I think for me, like I just happened upon Prank Access. And if you didn't know George, you wouldn't know he had channels, but he actually
Mm,
has
yeah.
3 of them with his shows and listed on them. But Prank Access is a good place to start. You get to hear, when the trolling sort of began, and it was on his show when people were calling in. That's how it's all started. You can hear Sean in some of them, which is fantastic. Definitely check out Sean's content. The George Sucks series is absolutely fantastic. It is such a good sort of summary of what George is and what he does and why people go after him.
Hmm.
I have to say, yeah, Sean did a great job, and also the True Narrative podcast. Um, they've done really, like the interviews with Angela. You get to
Hmm.
hear the real story and not, it sort of counters what George is always saying, and you get to hear a different opinion, and
Yeah.
in which means you get to hear the truth and not,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, is there anything about George, anything he's done or said that you think doesn't get talked about enough?
That's a good question.
And if the
Because
answer is no, that's fine. I mean, especially on field ends, you cover them pretty thoroughly, so you may not have anything.
actually the thing that I'm surprised hasn't been sort of talked about more is his clearly he's a pedophile. I've come to that conclusion. After his last show, that was it for me. George is a
Hmm.
pedophile. Um, he wants to do sexual things with kids. And the thing is, he says it. He clearly says it in his videos on his quote unquote shows. it's right there. And I'm just kind of surprised more people aren't talking about that. The focus is always
Mhm.
on Magic Matt,
Right.
and what he did. But yeah, I'm surprised, people haven't really gone after George more for that. I plan to, so feel free to join me, but I can't take it anymore.
Yeah,
Like
he
listening to his last show, I was almost physically ill. It's
he's
gotten to that point.
yeah, no, that makes complete sense. He seems like he's on a pretty good streak with these recent shows of making
Yes.
some kind of awful comment about doing something to a little girl.
And
Uh,
even in his old shows, when we go over them on Fieldins, there's always in every single episode, there's always something related to kids and sex or animals and sex every time. Like it's not just random. On every show we manage to find something. So yeah, it's not just, like I'm convinced. I'm
mm,
convinced George is a pedophile.
yeah, there's plenty of evidence.
Exactly.
In George's entourage, is there anybody you feel sorry for, or anybody you just outright hate, or are your feelings just kind of neutral?
Yeah, I there's no one I feel sorry for. Up until recently, I kind of gave Kevin a pass. I
Mhm.
almost felt sorry for him because, George is clearly abusive towards him. Uh, and, the theory was that, Kevin only sticks around because George has something over him. We don't know what it is. We can only speculate, maybe it has something to do with his sexual orientation. We don't know. Um, but for me, it was not his last show, but the show before, um, where George said something very disgusting, sexual about children, and Kevin just sat there and laughed. That was it for me. Um, any sort of pass I'd given Kevin up until that point was gone. So, he's off the list, and now the list is empty. I don't feel sorry for anybody. Anybody who knows George, knows what he's accused of, knows what
Mhm.
kind of person he is. Just by watching his shows, you can see how abusive he is to Kevin and basically anyone, how he treats women. So if you associate George knowing all that, then you get no sympathy from me.
Yeah, it's been interesting the trajectory of the Goon's relationship with Kevin over the years. I feel like you mentioned you used to give him a pass, and I think that was pretty common. Kevin's gotten a lot of passes because, he seemed like a decent guy, and George was an abusive friend, so you felt sorry for him. But
Right.
it certainly seems like the longer he stands by George, collectively, the less sorry the community feels for him at a certain point. That's
Yeah.
he's choosing to be around George for bad reasons.
Yeah. I mean, with the allegation against Jamie, that was bad enough. Maybe in Kevin's mind, it was, nothing was proven. So he kind of stood by George despite the
Mhm.
allegation. Um, but yeah, just when that comment George made, it was absolutely disgusting. And Kevin just not only did he just sit there, he laughed. Um, so for me, it was like, Kevin, you're just as bad as George is, as far as I'm concerned. You may as well have said it, to sit there and laugh at it. Yeah, that's not
Mhm.
cool.
Have you ever had any trouble covering Jamie content?
As far as getting content or just sort of like
Um,
psychologically.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there's been moments where it's been tough just trying to put yourself in her shoes. Um, the voicemails especially, you know, hearing that, George was basically holding her hostage.
Mhm.
Um, how he wouldn't let her leave, he cut up her shoes, just the way he treated her. It's really hard to kind of put yourself in her shoes because it's really sad actually. Um, I know a lot of people don't necessarily have the same empathy for Jamie because she certainly wasn't perfect. She had her flaws. She had been arrested several times. Um, but I mean, still to get mixed up with George, yeah, nobody deserves that.
No, nobody does. Well, as George's life continues to go downhill, I'd love to learn more about what you've got coming up. Do you have any other plans for content and regarding George or any other of the locales that you cover?
I don't think there'll ever be a shortage of George content. And it's true. I mean, this probably could go on forever as long as George keeps putting stuff out. We'll cover him, and
Mhm.
that was sort of the agreement that the three of us made. As long as there's George content, we'll cover it. Whatever it is, whether it's a show, a rager, and yeah. So as far as I know, there'll always be content. Um, yeah, we're just going to keep. I mean, obviously, he's put out some stuff recently. We're definitely going to be covering that very soon. I have a lot to say about it. Um, I'm sure Tony and Lewis do as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
are you're going to GoonCon, right?
yes,
Awesome. Yeah, what are you most looking forward to at the inaugural meetup?
I'm looking forward to meeting everybody. I like Tony. We've been doing the show together for a year. We've never met each other, but we consider each other friends, even though it's we've never met.
Mhm.
Same with Lewis. I'm just really excited to meet everybody.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be really awesome. Do you have a GG historic location that you're most excited about visiting?
Well, because we're field-ins, I'm looking forward to, even though it's not open anymore, apparently the sign is still up.
Mhm.
So I definitely want a picture of me, Tony and Lewis in front of field-ins.
Oh,
Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool because that's where our name came from, right?
yeah, yeah, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, definitely want to see. I'm curious to see the Banks house.
Mhm.
The woods where Jay was hiding.
Is there a particular video from one of the other content creators that you keep going back to?
I love the Jay Smith calls
Yeah, that
between him and
yeah.
George.
Yeah, I was honestly just listening to that this morning. That's one of my favorite too. Like that, especially that like hour-long
Yes.
compilation. It's fun to just put that on, and I'll like have that on while I'm doing housework or reading
Yeah.
or something. It's just such a
Yeah.
good time.
Jay triggered George, almost as bad as Marty does.
Uh
So it's hilarious to listen to them because George just gets so angry.
huh. Yeah, Jay Smith has a special talent.
Yes, he
That is for
does.
sure.